2 of Wilfred Owen's exposure now, and you'll see that the board is just as busy and as detailed as it was for the first part. So the second part begins in the third stanza. The poignant misery of dawn begins to grow. We only know war lasts, rain soaks and clouds sag stormy, dawn massing in the east her melancholy army. Attacks once more in ranks on shivering ranks of grey, but nothing happens. Sudden successive flights of bullets streak the silence, less deadly than the air that shudders black with snow, with sidelong flowing flakes that flock, pause and renew. We watch them wandering up and down the wind's nonchalance, but nothing happens. Pale flakes with fingering stealth come feeling for our faces. We cringe in holes back on forgotten dreams and stare snow-dazed deep into grassier ditches. So we drowse sun-dozed, littered with blossoms trickling where the blackbird fusses. Is it that we are dying? Loads of things again as usual with this poem. But we'll start line by line with stanza 3. The poignant misery of dawn begins to grow. Now, dawn. We've talked about dawn being the rising of the sun in so many other poems. Kamikaze, in Emigre, in Tissue. The image of sunlight is positive. However, dawn isn't linked with sunlight here. It's linked with more dreadful weather, with more death. So actually the symbol of dawn is used ironically here. There is no dawn because day doesn't break, the sun doesn't come out. It's more misery, it's more grey, it's more weather that kills. And that symbol used ironically suggests that repetition of the death, the repetition of the never-ending awful weather, the storms that are killing as much as the bullets and the shells are actually doing. Now, in the last section I did on this, I had ellipses on the board. I don't think I mentioned them. They're after the first 3 lines of the poem, and also at the end of the first line of the third stanza. Now the ellipses, the ... there, it emphasises the pace, or rather the lack of it. Remember, this is a poem about nothing happening, and it's repeated again in these 2 stanzas here. Nothing is changing, nothing is different. All they've got is time, and that time isn't good time because it's time where they are exposed to the weather. It's time where they are being killed because of the cold and the illnesses associated with the cold. So that lack of pace is so important, and we've got lots of punctuation throughout the poem, and in particular in this section, that reflect that pausing, that stopping, that lack of pace. They are just being left there to die, left there to be killed by the weather and the pneumonia and everything that comes with it. We only know war lasts. Remember, they don't know what's going to happen with the war, but what they do know is that war lasts a long time, 4.5 years. Rain soaks, so they're constantly wet, and clouds sag stormy. So if you imagine the clouds now coming in, and you can see for miles and miles and miles, and all you can see is grey. We're used to this in Britain, and those grey days where you can see nothing but clouds, and imagine them sagging, almost bulging with that rain, ready to unload their water on the soldiers below, creating even more misery. And the clouds suddenly become the enemy here and are personified just like the iced east winds in the first lines. The clouds sag stormy. Now we come on to the key part of this section. Dawn massing in the east her melancholy army. Notice her, that pronoun, that personification that establishes the melancholy army. Melancholy means deeply sad, depressing, the army. And the use of military semantic field here really emphasises the weather as an enemy. So you've got the army, the ranks upon shivering ranks. Usually we would talk about army ranks and soldiers one behind the other, or lines behind the other. And that's just how the clouds appear. They stretch on forever, as if they're facing an enemy that is never ending. Dawn massing in the east her melancholy army. We mustn't miss out that idea of dawn again being ironic. It's supposed to be a positive image in much of literature. Here again, it's just bringing more misery. But massing, That continuous verb, that ing participle verb, suggesting that it just reloads. There's more and more coming. And a mass, of course, is a huge gathering. So it suggests, again, it emphasizes that never-ending quality of the weather. They can't beat it because it just keeps coming back and it kills them, and there's nothing they can do about it. Attacks once more. So again, the military language attacks. The enemy is the weather, which is why it's personified, the gathering of the clouds, the gathering of the storms. Attacks once more in ranks on shivering ranks of grey. And that's the key quote. If you're going to remember one thing, remember the ranks upon shivering ranks of grey. There's so much you can get out of that. Link it to the melancholy army, because both are a personification of the gathering weather. Ranks upon shivering ranks of grey. The repetition of ranks really emphasises that scale. It's more and more and more and more, and there's nothing they can do about it. The soldiers are helpless. So that repetition emphasises the scale there. We've talked about the semantic field of military. A semantic field are words that are associated with a particular topic. So here we've got army, we've got ranks, we've got attacks, all of those connected with the military. And of course, if you use the semantic field, you're getting those AO2 marks for language there as well, noticing what Owen is doing with his language. But again, don't miss out some of the simpler things here. There's probably a fourth thing that you can say, a fourth layer of interpretation here, because the shivering and the grey really give that emphasis of a sense of cold and misery. Grey is a colour that connotes, that suggests misery, and of course the weather really reflects that that dullness, that depression, that misery that has set in. And the cold, the shivering ranks. You know, that imagine your clothes being soaked. We have that line, of course, that rain soaks, and there's no way to dry their outfits, their uniform. They have to live in that cold, wet misery, and all they can see is more of it coming. But nothing happens. Remember, nothing is changing here. They are stuck where they are. And that repetition at the end of stanzas, and the fact that it's a shorter line, really emphasizes and makes it stand out that nothing is ever changing. They're helpless, they're hopeless, and there's nothing they can do about the weather and the fact that they're dying slowly from it. Then we've got a slight change of pace here. Sudden successive flights of bullets streak the silence. Now notice there the sibilants again. We've got the S sounds, the alliteration of those S sounds, and it sounds quick. The pace quickens because all of a sudden, and we've got that idea of sudden, that adjective there. Link it to suddenly at the start of Bayonet Charge if you're going to link those two poems, because we have got a sudden, a quick change of pace, and that's emphasised by that sudden. But it's brief. Sudden successive flights of bullets streak the silence, and that sibilant reflects the sound of the bullets, the through the air of the bullets. But at least it's quick. Death by a bullet is quick. And notice how it's juxtaposed, this alliteration. The sibilance of the speed of the bullet is juxtaposed and contrasted with the fluff alliteration that comes a little later. Less deadly than the air that shudders black with snow. So Owen is telling us that the weather is more deadly than the bullets. It lasts longer. The death is more painful, more miserable, less glorious perhaps than a death by bullet in the public's eyes. So less deadly than the air that shudders black with snow. We've got another depressing colour there, the black with snow. And the snow is even worse than the rain because it's colder. With sidelong, so you can imagine the wind, you know, when the snow comes at you from the side and it's a blizzard and it's perishing. With sidelong flowing flakes that flock. Now notice those fl sounds. An F sound is a fricative. And the idea is that there's pressure there in the mouth, and it means that we have to linger over those phrases. The flowing flakes that flock. You can't say those quickly. So it emphasizes to me that the fact that the snow sticks to them and that the death and the misery is longer than the pace of the bullets with that sibilance. And notice there you've got the commas, pause and renew. So it comes again and again and again. And that contrasts again with the sudden bullets. At least the bullets are quick. Owen is not saying that that is necessarily a good thing, but at least death would be quick. And all they're waiting for is death throughout this whole poem. And the death from the weather is slow and painful and miserable. And that little alliteration is a really good way of showing the speed of the bullets compared to the slow torture of the weather. Okay, we watch them wandering up and down the wind's nonchalance. Nonchalance means it doesn't care. It's not even aware of the damage, the misery that it's causing. So the wind's nonchalance means it's uncaring. Link it back to the merciless iced east winds. The weather doesn't care. It doesn't matter to the weather that it's killing thousands of people below. But nothing happens. Pale flakes with fingering stealth come feeling for our faces. Again, you've got that personification of the weather. And in this case, it's the snowflakes that stick to the faces, causing cold, causing pneumonia, causing a slow, lingering, horrible, miserable death. We cringe in holes, back on forgotten dreams, and stare, snow-dozed deep into grassier ditches. And this is the point where, because of the weather, they retreat back into their trenches, into their holes, as Wilfred Owen puts it here, forgotten dreams. So we start the sort of more dreamlike element where the soldiers' minds, already tortured, start to drift away to something else. But the dreams are forgotten. They're no longer thinking about their life at home, their families, their partners, their wives. They're forgotten. Those dreams, those aspirations are forgotten. It's just about survival. And in this case, they almost don't want to survive because it's so miserable to survive because of that ever-present snow, that ever-present weather, that ever-present cold that they can't escape. So we drowse, so that they're sleeping sun-dozed, littered with blossoms trickling where the blackbird fusses. Now, this isn't in reality. This is their dreams going somewhere else. Their only escape from the weather is in their minds. And they go to the blossoms, you know, this idea of spring, the blackbird fussing. So images of home, the blackbird is typically associated with an English spring. And because they're dreaming, because they're thinking, that final rhetorical question there in this stanza, is it that we are dying? And their only escape is to think of the potential joy of dying because it's an escape from the misery of war.